Some people say they can smell ghost. A familiar perfume drifts through an empty hallway. Cigarette smoke appears in a house where no one has smoked for years. Someone catches the scent of flowers beside a hospital bed, though there's no flowers in the room. Sometimes the smell is a lovely scent. Sometimes it's stale or damp. It might smell like old clothing or soap, tobacco, rain, or someone cooking. Maybe it smells like a long-dead uncle's aftershave. Welcome back to the Inner Circle. I'm Nicole Blackwater, and today we are talking about the stories we breathe in, scent, history, and the worlds we build with both. The Ghost Museum in Berlin, Maryland, has a station built around this idea of smelling ghost. Fragrances are attached to little spray bulbs, and each one is intended to evoke something ghostly. You can smell a grave, a haunted house, spectral flowers. There is even one that might smell like the king of rock and roll himself. Now, I have never personally smelled Elvis, but I did take a whiff of something created to evoke his persona. I just love that the curator of the Ghost Museum looked at death and was like, you know what this needs? A sniffing station. Ghosts appear in mirrors, and they move objects, they walk through walls, and whisper directly into recording equipment, even though they refuse to communicate clearly with someone actually in the room. Scent may be one of the most convincing ways for a presence to announce itself. A shadow in a doorway remains across the room. A smell enters your body. You breathe it in before you've decided whether you believe in it or not. So years ago, a friend lived with us while she was in between places. She is someone who has always experienced things that other people may not notice, including unusual smells connected to other people or presences. And while she was staying with us, she kept mentioning a strange odor in our kitchen. It was not there all the time. It appeared without an obvious source, and she couldn't quite describe it at first. It only seemed to appear when I was there in the kitchen with her. We looked in cabinets and under the stove, thinking maybe there was a rotten potato somewhere, but we had no luck in locating the source of this scent. Until one day, she was like, "It smells like a dog?" And I was there cooking dinner, and it clicked. I put my spatula down, I ran to the dining room, I went to this little box, and I came back carrying something, and I offered it to her, and I was like, "Look, smell this." And she lit up with recognition. This is it. So what I had handed her was our sweet girl Coda's halter that I had kept in her memory box. So when she was still with us, Coda would sit beside me whenever I cooked. She was there in that little patch of kitchen floor, and she had this unwavering faith that one day I might drop my entire dinner into her mouth. And I realized that our friends seemed to notice the smell only when I was standing at the stove and when she was standing in the place where Coda always sat beside me. I cannot tell you that our friend was smelling Coda's ghost, but I can tell you that she recognized Coda's scent in the exact place that Coda used to sit beside me while I cooked. And it only happened when I was cooking. I'm content leaving this story here. It doesn't need proof of anything. It was strange and tender, and we both cried. Scent has this incredible way of carrying something familiar that should no longer be physically present. It reaches into ordinary moments and opens a door you didn't know was there. So a little while ago, I washed my hands in a public restroom, and the soap smelled identical to the hand sanitizer from my first grade classroom. I have not thought about this sanitizer in decades. I certainly have not spent my entire life carrying a treasured emotional attachment to first grade Germ-X. There was no part of my conscious mind wistfully awaiting the return of this scent. But then I smelled it and I was instantly transported to the hallways of Princess Anne Primary as we all lined up outside the restroom to get a squirt of hand sanitizer. I can see the painted murals on the walls and even remember most of my classmates' names. That memory had been somewhere inside of me all along. I just didn't know how to reach it. Then that random soap handed my brain the right key. Smell has this powerful relationship with autobiographical memory. An odor can call up an old experience quickly, emotionally, and without warning. The memory may not be a perfect recording of the past because human memory doesn't really work that way, but that feeling of being returned can be so remarkably strong. For just a moment, you are transported to an entirely different place. This may be part of the reason stories about ghostly smells carry so much force. Scent does not have to prove that the absent person has physically entered the room. It can create the experience of their nearness before our conscious mind has caught up. Scent can bring back a beloved dog beside the stove. It can rebuild a classroom. Scent can make a person or place or another time feel present inside the air you're breathing right now. Humans have been using that power for a very long time. We've filled rooms with fragrance to welcome guests and to honor the dead. We've placed scent on bodies, sacred images, letters, clothing, altars, household objects. We have burned rare materials until they disappeared into smoke because ordinary air could not carry everything we wanted to express. We've used scent to carry prayers and to hold memory, to evoke status. Scent has helped us grieve and feel beautiful and feel like we belong. Scent can represent the presence of something greater than ourselves. Today, I want to ask what incense is, why particular scents become associated with the sacred, how those associations entered modern perfume, home fragrance, witchcraft, and metaphysical culture. I also want to talk about what happens when history becomes a product description, how a resin with its own ecology and cultural life becomes a little card at a shop that simply says, good for cleansing, how a living tradition becomes an aesthetic, how we can work with scent creatively, spiritually, or simply because it smells wonderful, while remaining honest about where those meanings come from. Because sometimes fragrance carries an enormous historical inheritance, and sometimes a candle just smells like a candle. Both are allowed. We use the word incense as though it describes one easily recognizable object. You say incense, and someone pictures a stick burning in a long wooden holder with one hole drilled into the end. Someone else pictures a cone smoking on a little metal tray. Another person imagines resin scattered over a charcoal disc. Someone else thinks of church, temple smoke, nag champa, sandalwood, a metaphysical shop, a college apartment, or that one aunt who always smelled like patchouli. All of those things may be called incense. They do not share one recipe, one cultural origin, or one method of production. At its broadest, incense is aromatic material used with heat so that fragrance enters the surrounding air. Sometimes the material burns directly. Sometimes it smolders. Sometimes it rests above a heat source and releases its aroma without producing much visible smoke. The material may be raw resin, wood, or powdered plants, or spices, or oils, fragrant paste, or a modern perfume composition added to a combustible base. Incense can be a substance. It can also be a process. This makes the question, who invented incense, difficult to answer. We could search for the earliest special vessel that appears to have held aromatic material. Or we could search for plant residues found on an altar. We could look for the earliest written recipe or the oldest depiction of smoke being offered to a deity. Each one would answer a different question. Humans have lived with fire long before they wrote down what they were placing into it. People would have noticed that different materials behave differently when heated. Some woods produced harsh smoke. Some released sweetness. Certain plants may have helped repel insects or shift unpleasant household odors. Resinous branches would have filled shelters with a smell far stronger than their size suggested. Nobody needed a formal religious system to discover that one plant made the room more bearable and another sent everybody coughing into the night. Practical and ceremonial uses could develop alongside one another. A material may be burned because it discourages insects, because it accompanies a funeral, because it is considered pleasing to a god, or because it disguises the fact that many bodies and animals have occupied a building in very warm weather. The same smoke can perform several jobs at once. When repeated use connects a scent with an important event, that scent begins to announce the event itself. A material burned at funerals can eventually evoke death and mourning before anyone sees a body. A fragrance reserved for a temple can signal that ceremonial time has begun. A resin used during prayer can make prayer feel closer the moment somebody opens the container. Scent gathers meaning through repetition. It gathers meaning through restriction, too. If a formula is reserved for priests, kings, healers, or a specific rite, its fragrance becomes connected with the authority surrounding that use. Cost adds another layer. If an aromatic material has traveled a great distance and passed through many hands, burning it demonstrates that that person or institution could obtain something rare and then deliberately consume it. That solid material is placed on heat. It softens, smolders, changes, and disappears entirely. That offering cannot be collected afterward and returned to inventory. It's gone. So its value becomes a part of the act. We can see why smoke lends itself so readily to ceremony. Smoke rises and travels. It moves through cracks. It curls around bodies. It makes air currents visible. Smoke turns something held between two fingers into an atmosphere shared by everyone present. We know that physics provides the movement, but we provide the interpretation. Prayers rise like smoke. Spirits move through the air. An offering passes from the visible world into an unseen one. These ideas appear in many places, although they do not mean that every tradition shares one universal explanation of incense. People encounter the same physical behavior and understand it through different religions, philosophies, environments, and social systems. Smoke offers us possibilities. We decide what those possibilities mean. Imagine approaching an ancient temple. It's the hottest point of the day. The stone has been absorbing sunlight for hours. Your feet are dusty. The courtyard is busy. People carry food, vessels, flour, oil, water, the supplies required to keep an enormous sacred institution functioning. There may be animals nearby. There may be blood from sacrifice, smoke from lamps, cooking, human bodies, stored goods. It's easy to imagine a temple in the way we are used to seeing their ruins today. But these were not always ancient and empty spaces. There would be people doing their jobs, offerings to prepare, rooms to be cleaned, fires to tend to, clothes to wash, sacred images to care for. Someone might even be wondering why they didn't order more incense this week. Incense makes the temple smell pleasant, but it also marks a boundary. Outside of the temple is ordinary traffic and labor. Inside, the air must be prepared. In some temple traditions, divine images were washed, dressed, anointed, fed, and even perfumed. These actions formed part of the care through which divine presence was approached and maintained. The scent could announce that the space had entered another mode. The ceremony had begun. Here we are addressing a god. Perhaps a body is being prepared for burial. We may be welcoming guests, or a king might be demonstrating his power. We've moved from daily mundane life to an event that requires attention. A temple scent could also communicate hierarchy. Who was allowed to prepare the formula? Who paid for the materials? Who controlled the room? Who stood nearest the altar and who remained outside? Fragrance fills space generously, but access to its source may be tightly controlled. Sacred atmosphere has never floated free of economics or authority. It requires material, labor, and someone with the ability to define what sacred space should smell like. Which brings us to one of the most famous substances ever placed on heat: frankincense. The word has been sitting in front of us this entire time. Frankincense. It kind of sounds like incense has arrived at a neighborhood barbecue and introduced itself. Hi, I'm frankincense. I've brought potato salad. The English name came through forms of Old French, where frankincense referred to incense of high quality, something like noble, pure, or excellent incense. The name tells us how highly the material was regarded in the European languages through which the word reached us. It also tells us something about the people naming it and trading it. Frankincense is a market name shaped by reputation, language, and distance. Frankincense is resin produced by trees in the genus Boswellia. Several species grow across parts of northeastern Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, each shaped by its own habitat, harvesting practices, chemistry, and trade. The resin emerges after the bark is cut or wounded. It hardens into those pale golden amber or darker pieces often called tears. The name is poetic, but the process is physical. A living tree is responding to injury. A harvester understands when and where to make cuts, how often the tree can be tapped, and when the resin is ready to collect. The little piece placed on a charcoal disc is the end of a much larger story. Before it ever reaches the burner, someone has worked on difficult land under a difficult climate. The resin may be sorted, carried, traded, taxed, shipped, repackaged, and sold several times. Frankincense traveled through networks linking African and Arabian production regions with Red Sea ports, Mediterranean markets, the Near East, South Asia, and the wider Indian Ocean commerce. This wasn't a permanent highway called the incense route. These routes were shifting. Empires changed, ports rose and declined. Goods traveled by sea and over land through political systems that demanded payment at every opportunity, of course. Frankincense became valuable through the combination of its fragrance, restricted growing regions, skilled harvest, demand, and distance. Its religious importance increased demand. Its cost could increase the significance of offering it. And those two forces reinforced each other. A rare material burned in a sacred setting carries the weight of the journey that brought it there. Yet, price alone does not create holiness. A locally abundant herb may become central to a community because it grows on ancestral land or appears in every family ceremony. A common flower may carry more emotional power than the most expensive imported resin. Sacredness can grow through proximity as easily as distance. Frankincense happens to have acquired both. It belonged to specific places and practices, and it also traveled far enough to enter many other religious and cultural worlds. For many Western listeners, frankincense first appears at Christmas with the three wise men: gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the gifts of the Magi. Children sing these words long before they know what either resin looks or smells like, if they ever do. The biblical account is far less furnished than the nativity sets that came afterward. Matthew does not tell us there were three visitors. It does not call them kings, give them the names Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, or assign a particular gift to each man. Those details accumulated through later Christian tradition. The familiar Western names were in circulation by about the Middle Ages, while other Christian traditions gave the Magi entirely different names. So the Bible cannot tell us whether Caspar, Melchior, or Ballyboy brought the frankincense. It does not know who any of those gentlemen are. Matthew tells us that the Magi came from the east, searching for the child born King of the Jews. When they found him, they bowed, opened their treasures, and presented gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Why those three gifts? Matthew does not stop to explain them as a symbolic code. All three were valuable, portable materials suitable for a tribute and extraordinary enough to present to someone understood as a king. Frankincense also carried a recognizable sacred history within Jewish scripture. It appears as an ingredient in the holy incense described in Exodus, while Isaiah imagines nations arriving with gold and frankincense in celebration of divine glory. Matthew's audience may have heard an echo of those older images when foreign visitors arrived bearing the same materials. Later Christian interpretation would give each gift a specific theological role. Gold represented kingship. Frankincense represented divinity or worship. Myrrh carried the darker association with mortality and burial. That tidy interpretation became enormously influential, but it was added to the story rather than explained within Matthew itself. The biblical presence of frankincense helped preserve its sacred reputation in Christian cultures. Church incense eventually gave that reputation an actual smell. Even people raised outside incense-using churches may recognize smoke, resin, and reverberating sacred architecture as parts of that same cultural image through movies, holiday stories, funerals, museums, and art. Frankincense also had uses beyond formal worship. It entered perfume, cosmetic preparations, household practices, regional medicines, and trade goods. In some cultures, forms of resin have been chewed or added to drinks. Within magical traditions, the resin may hold value even when nobody burns it. Hoodoo is an African-American folk spiritual tradition shaped by African continuities, Christianity, regional knowledge, and the conditions of life under slavery and its aftermath. Within some hoodoo practice, frankincense can be carried in a pocket or a mojo bag for luck, blessings, prosperity, or protection. Here, the resin itself becomes a part of the work. Its purpose is not limited to producing smoke. That example is useful because the modern category of incense can obscure the fuller life of an aromatic substance. We see a resin in a shop and assume its destiny is to be placed on charcoal. The same material may actually be worn, carried, infused, offered, compounded, or kept close to the body. Its meaning changes with the practice. And as spirituality has become more mainstream, materials from distinct traditions are often grouped together and presented as though they belong to one shared system. Naming the tradition behind a particular use helps preserve the history and cultural context that gave that practice its shape. We can recognize shared materials without pretending the traditions using them are interchangeable. Frankincense may belong to a church censer, a perfumer's formula, a hoodoo mojo bag, a household remedy, a historical trade shipment, or somebody's favorite woody scent. The material does not choose one meaning for everyone. People create meaning through use. Myrrh is paired with frankincense so consistently that the two begin to sound like a single product. Frankincense and myrrh. You can even buy it that way. One word. Available seasonally beside the nativity sets. The Christmas story gave myrrh enormous recognition in Christian cultures, but the resin arrived in that story carrying a much older life of its own. Myrrh comes from the trees and shrubs in the genus Commiphora, which belongs to the same botanical family as frankincense, but represents different species, landscapes, scents, and histories. Its English name is connected with words for bitterness, which gave us a clue about its sensory character. Myrrh can smell earthy, dark, smoky, medicinal, leathery, balsamic, and sharp. It carries warmth without becoming soft. Its intensity helps explain why modern spiritual and perfume culture often associate it with death, protection, grounding, wounds, and transformation. Those associations grew from myrrh's use in funerary practices, perfumes, religious offerings, cosmetics, anointing, and medicinal preparations across parts of Africa, the Near East, and the Mediterranean. Its use around bodies and burial helped build its relationship with mortality. Later Christian interpretation drew that existing relationship into the life of Jesus. Myrrh had appeared among the treasures presented near the beginning of his life, and it appeared again within gospel accounts surrounding his suffering and burial. The resin became attached to arrival and departure, birth and burial. That symbolic pattern is powerful, although it should not be mistaken for one universal meaning shared everywhere myrrh traveled. Modern metaphysical books often give each resin a tidy job. Frankincense lifts, myrrh grounds, benzoin sweetens. The formula is appealing because it is easy to remember and easy to sell. It can also hide the fact that these materials entered modern spiritual culture through separate ecologies, trade histories, religions, and commercial systems. The contemporary meanings are not necessarily fake, but they are often selective. They take one portion of a material's history, polish it into a usable and marketable symbol, and leave the rest outside of the package. That happens constantly when spirituality becomes mainstream. Thanks, capitalism. Complex practices must be shrunk to fit on labels. A resin with 2,000 years of trade, medicine, ritual, domestic life, and political history just becomes myrrh. Protection, healing, grounding. 3 words, maybe a cute moon graphic. Capitalism loves a clear benefit statement, and retail shelves just do not have much patience for ambiguity. The customer wants to know what the item is for, and the shop wants to provide an answer before someone has to read a 70-page monograph beside the cash register. I understand the practical problem because I ran the local witch shop for 5 years. Our community included practitioners from many traditions. People came in with different religious backgrounds, magical systems, family practices, levels of experience, and reasons for wanting the same material. A person purchasing frankincense for Catholic devotional use may understand it differently from someone using it within hoodoo or Santeria. The material can appear in each practice without collapsing those practices into one thing. The challenge is helping people find what they need while resisting the pressure to reduce every material to a universal list of properties. One approach is to replace the question, what is this for, with several better questions. Where did this come from? Who uses it this way? What is the purpose within that practice? Are we discussing a religious tradition, a folk practice, a modern correspondence system, an artistic association, a personal experience? That answer might fit on a shop card, but this answer needs enough context to remain attached to the people who created it. Benzoin often appears beside frankincense and myrrh in resin collections and incense blends. It looks like it belongs. All three can arrive as irregular pieces of aromatic resin. All three may be burned. They can smell warm, rich, ancient, and vaguely golden when placed together. The visual similarity encourages us to treat them as a natural set. However, benzoin has its own biography. It comes from the trees in the genus Styrax, particularly species associated with Southwest Asia. Different commercial types have been produced in regions including Sumatra and mainland Southeast Asia. Its scent is sweeter than the bitter darkness of myrrh. Benzoin can suggest vanilla, caramel, soft spice, powder, warm wood, and balsam. Perfumers value it for the richness it brings to a composition and for the way it supports other notes. It became important in incense, perfume, regional medicine, flavoring, and trade. Its historical networks connected Southeast Asian producers with Chinese, South Asian, Islamic, and eventually European markets. Even its name appears to preserve a history of comparison. Etymological discussions often connect benzoin with an Arabic expression meaning something like Javanese frankincense. The new material entered trade by being explained through a familiar one. This is the fragrant equivalent of telling somebody that an unfamiliar animal is sort of like a cat, which is useful for approximately 7 seconds, after which the comparison begins causing problems. Benzoin is not frankincense from Java. It has its own trees, harvesters, communities, uses, and movement through the world. Yet the comparison shaped how distant buyers understood it. Trade names can preserve the viewpoint of merchants more clearly than the identity of the material itself. Modern metaphysical culture often places benzoin into the sacred resin trio as the sweet one. Frankincense elevates, myrrh grounds, benzoin blesses, softens, or attracts prosperity. And that can be a perfectly functional modern symbolic system. The trouble begins when the system is presented as the complete ancient truth of all these materials. Benzoin demonstrates why this episode simply cannot be one smooth timeline, beginning in an Egyptian temple and ending in a witch shop. A resin from Southeast Asia enters a modern blend with two materials strongly associated with Africa, Arabia, the Near East, and biblical tradition. Church incense, international trade, perfumery, occult publishing, and commercial convenience helped bring them together. The trio feels ancient because modern culture has taught us to experience it that way. Once materials are packaged beside one another often enough, the arrangement begins to seem inevitable. It was built. The fact that something was built does not make it meaningless, but it does give us a chance to ask who built it and why. So, how then does a scent become sacred? A plant does not grow with the word sacred stamped onto its bark. A molecule does not enter the nose carrying an instruction to begin praying. Scent becomes sacred through relationship. A community uses a material during worship. A family associates it with funerals. A temple reserves it for a particular ceremony. A religious text names it. A sacred image is anointed with it. A child smells it every year during a holiday. And eventually, the fragrance itself can announce the sacred before anyone explains what is happening. The process resembles the way music gathers meaning. A melody heard during weddings begins to sound like marriage. A song played at funerals carries grief, even when heard somewhere else. Nothing inside the individual notes contains a wedding or a funeral. Meaning comes from this repeated human use. Scent may create an even faster response because it reaches memory with so little warning. You open a church door and know what kind of room you have entered. You smell incense in a shop and recognize a metaphysical atmosphere. You notice a particular perfume and remember somebody before you remember their face. Sacredness also grows from stories. Frankincense and myrrh carry biblical imagery into Western culture. Sandalwood carries the weight of South Asian religious, cosmetic, funerary, and artistic histories, although modern Western marketing often compresses those histories into the single word, meditation. Agarwood, also known through names such as aloes wood and oud, traveled through South and Southeast Asian production regions into Buddhist, Islamic, Chinese, Japanese, and commercial perfume worlds. In Japan, aromatic wood became part of highly attentive fragrance practices, and eventually kodo, the way of incense. One practice within kodo, manko, often translated to listening to incense. There's a small piece of fragrant wood gently warmed and attended to closely, allowing its character to unfold, rather than burning it simply to fill the room as forcefully as possible. In Islamic societies, perfume and incense have appeared in personal grooming, hospitality, court life, pilgrimage, domestic spaces, and places of worship. Practices vary across region and period. There is no one single Islamic incense tradition, just as there is no single Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, indigenous, or magical one. These examples do not need to become a global survey, but they can show that fragrant materials can gather sacred meaning through many routes. A wood may become precious because the tree produces it rarely. A resin may become associated with a scripture. A perfume may accompany hospitality so consistently that welcoming someone properly includes changing the air around them. A flower may belong to a deity, a season, a funeral, or a family tradition. Trade carries materials beyond their original regions. Religion carries stories. Empire carries both, frequently without asking for permission. Commercial perfume carries fragments into new formulas. Occult books create correspondence systems that gather pieces from classical sources, medieval medicine, Christian symbolism, ceremonial magic, folklore, colonial botany, modern paganism, and personal experimentation. Then those systems enter mass publishing. So a table appears. Frankincense means sun, purification, divinity. Myrrh, moon, death, healing. Benzoin, prosperity, blessing. The table might be useful, but it also makes everything look settled. The reader cannot see which association came from a historical context, which developed through church practice, which belongs to a later occult system, and which may have been added because the author personally just liked the smell. When many traditions arrive on the same page without context, they begin to resemble one modern spirituality that has existed forever. That is how flattening happens. It does not always begin with cruelty or deliberate theft. Often it begins with convenience. A writer wants to teach a beginner. A shop owner needs to explain a product. A customer wants to know what to do with it. A publisher wants a clean chart. A social media post has room for 100 words and a picture of smoke curling attractively around a crystal. Specificity becomes the first thing that is sacrificed. Ethical sourcing of meaning asks us to resist that loss. We already know where the materials come from. Was the plant harvested responsibly? Is the species under ecological pressure? Were the workers paid fairly? Can the supplier explain the supply chain? We can ask similar questions about symbolism. Where did this association come from? Which culture, religion, community, or magical practice shaped it? Why am I invoking that history? Am I educating people, building an artistic reference, participating in a practice, or borrowing spiritual authority to make the product sound more powerful? These questions do not exist to prevent anyone from enjoying fragrance. Instead, they help us describe what we are doing accurately. A person can appreciate sandalwood without claiming to represent every tradition that has used it. A perfumer can create an oud accord without pretending the bottle contains rare wild agarwood. A candle can evoke church incense as part of a Gothic atmosphere without claiming to consecrate a room. History adds depth to our practices when we let it remain specific. This episode could accidentally create the impression that every fragrant object needs a sacred purpose. It does not. I often describe witchcraft as existing on a spectrum from practical to ceremonial. Some practices involve elaborate preparation, formal ritual, inherited structure, specific tools, and a great deal of intention. Other practices involve doing something useful in the kitchen while wearing your pajamas. Fragrance lives on a similar spectrum. At one end, scent may be a part of worship, offering, initiation, prayer, ancestor work, or a culturally specific spiritual practice. It may be restricted, or it may carry religious authority. The ingredients and method may matter enormously. Contemporary practitioners continue to develop their own relationships with smoke and fragrance. One resource I genuinely recommend is the book Sacred Smoke by author, herbalist, and aromatherapist Amy Blackthorne. Amy approaches these subjects with the kind of thoughtfulness, practicality, and ethical care that I value enormously. Her work is an excellent resource for anyone interested in contemporary uses of smoke and scent within magical practice. Elsewhere on the spectrum, scent creates atmosphere or artistic meaning. A perfumer builds character. A candle evokes a season. A baker draws from literature or history to create a sensory experience. Then there is the practical end. A soap smells fresh. A room spray covers the smell of dinner. A candle smells like apples because apples smell good. The apple is not required to symbolize immortality, temptation, harvest, Venus, ancestral wisdom, the underworld, or your third-grade teacher. It can just be an apple. Pleasure is sufficient reason to enjoy fragrance. We get into trouble when we assign sacred authority where none exist. But we can also flatten materials by treating them as sacred at all times. Palo Santo provides a useful example. The phrase means holy wood in Spanish, and it can refer to different plants as well as different regional histories. Some of the clearest documented spiritual uses of Bursera graveolens come from northern Peruvian curanderismo, particularly in regions such as Piura, Lambayeque, and Cajamarca. Healers have used Palo Santo smoke in limpias and other practices connected with harmful spiritual influences, protection, and the cleansing of people or homes. Related uses also appear in the traditional healing cultures of southern Ecuador. These practices are regional and varied. They developed through local indigenous knowledge, curanderismo, and the particular histories of the communities where the tree grows. They should not be compressed into one universal indigenous Palo Santo ceremony. The wood also has practical uses. Ethnobotanical records describe it being burned around animal corrals to discourage insects, and it has long been used simply to scent lived spaces. Practical and spiritual uses can exist beside one another. One does not invalidate the other. Modern wellness culture frequently removes those details and presents Palo Santo as one universal indigenous product for clearing bad vibes. The marketing may sound respectful because it uses words such as sacred or ancient, while erasing the actual regional practices that gave the material its spiritual reputation in the first place. In some cases, a secular perfume referencing the aroma may make a more honest claim than a wellness product borrowing vague indigenous authority to sell itself. A Palo Santo fragrance accord offers a good way to understand the difference. The accord may use aroma materials to evoke a woody, smoky, citrusy, or balsamic scent associated with Palo Santo. It may or may not contain material from the actual tree. Using that accord in perfume, incense, home fragrances, that does not automatically claim participation in a South American spiritual tradition. Perfume materials do not automatically claim ritual authority. They can reference woods, resin, smoke, or incense without pretending to be the tradition itself. The accord is an aroma. The language around it tells us what kind of claim the maker is making. Palo Santo-inspired woody fragrance describes a scent. Authentic indigenous shaman cleansing spray grabs a collection of identities, traditions, and spiritual authority just to sell a bottle. It sounds specific while saying almost nothing at all. The result is a marketing fantasy that flattens living cultures into a single mystical product category. The less specific the marketing is about the tradition it invokes, the more mystical it sounds and the more authority it tries to claim. One evokes the aromatic profile. The other invents a ritual pedigree. The harm doesn't come from smelling like Palo Santo. It comes from claiming a tradition that is not yours to claim. Ecology remains relevant whether the use is spiritual or secular. When a product contains harvested plant material, sourcing deserves attention. What species is involved? Where did it grow? Was it cut from a living tree or gathered after natural fall? Who benefits from the trade? A fragrance accord may reduce pressure on a rare or over-harvested material, although the safety and environmental profile of the modern ingredients still deserves evaluation. Synthetic does not mean immoral. Natural does not mean harmless. Ancient does not function as a safety certification. That brings us into modern fragrance. Perfume changes the way a person enters a room. It travels ahead of the body and remains after the body leaves. A fragrance may stay close to the skin, creating a private warmth noticed only by someone nearby. Another announces itself from across the building and arrives at the meeting several minutes before the person wearing it. Modern perfume advertising sells far more than smell. It sells a version of the wearer. This perfume is elegant. This perfume is reckless. This perfume owns property in several countries and has never compared prices at a grocery store. This perfume is innocent. This one is dangerous. This one is called something like Midnight Obsession, and it comes in a black bottle shaped as though it may contain either fragrance or a minor demon. The bottle, name, model, color, music, and advertisement teach us how to read the scent. The molecules do not possess gender. Commercial culture dresses them in pink or black and tells us who should wear them. Perfume becomes a chosen aura because the wearer participates in building the impression that surrounds the body. The control is never complete. Other people bring their own memories and associations. A rose perfume may smell romantic to one person and remind someone else of a funeral. A clean musk may feel comforting to one wearer and smell like the laundry detergent used in an unpleasant childhood home. Still, selecting fragrance allows us to participate in the atmosphere of our own presence. Home fragrance expands that choice beyond the body. A candle, room spray, diffuser, wax melt, or incense product can create an entire setting through scent. Pine brings winter into a room with no trees. A salted ocean fragrance creates a coastline inside a bedroom. Apple pie can fill a kitchen even when nobody has baked anything and dinner was a frozen pizza. Somewhere along this long history of changing the air, humanity created an enormous glass jar labeled autumn wreath. I mean this affectionately. A Yankee candle does not need to trace its lineage to an ancient temple in order to perform something interesting. It builds a world. The room is physically the same room, but the atmosphere now suggests leaves, spice, wood, warmth, and a season that may not exist outside your window. Home fragrance is our chosen world. This is where my own fragrance practice lives most of the time. My work moves between the secular, the artistic, the historical, and the ceremonial. I make fragrances inspired by folklore and art, literature, and seasonal rituals. I also create goods intended for ritual use, sometimes in response to the specific needs of the people and traditions I serve. And when I do, I try to ground that work in the most reliable history, practice, and cultural context that's available to me. The source may provide the story, the symbolism, or the structure of the work. Fragrance gives it atmosphere, memory, and physical presence. One of my favorite customers recently told me that my scents create a transcendent experience. Transcendence sounds like a very large claim. I am not claiming that a candle lifts someone directly into the heavens. The experience can be much smaller and still deserve the word. A person smells something and temporarily leaves ordinary time. They remember a place. They enter a story. They feel more like themselves. The room changes enough that their attention changes with it. That is what I am trying to make. The research, symbolism, and history belong in the making. They shape the materials I choose, the atmosphere I build, the language I use, and the claims I am willing to make. They help me create with greater intention and honesty. That genuine care for where ideas and materials come from is part of what allows the finished work to create those transcendent experiences. It gives the fragrance roots. It makes it something more than Nicole number 5, a pleasant scent assembled around a clever name. That does not mean everyone has to experience that way. Sometimes a person smells something I made and they simply think it smells wonderful. That is also a fragrance doing its job. Today, the word incense covers an astonishing range of objects. Raw resin may hiss and melt on a charcoal disc. A piece of agarwood may be heated gently so its aroma unfolds without a cloud of smoke. A South Asian incense stick may be formed around a bamboo core with aromatic paste. A Japanese stick may have no core at all. Incense can appear as a cone, coil, powder, pellet, rope, kneaded mixture, or wood chips, or a loose blend, or modern charcoal blanks carrying fragrance. These forms did not emerge as stages in one tidy progression. Different technologies developed within different cultural and industries. They traveled, changed, and entered new markets. Modern manufacturing introduced new binders, combustion systems, solvents, synthetic aroma molecules, standardized blanks, and mass distribution. A contemporary incense product may draw its fragrance from natural extracts, synthetic materials, or a combination. The phrase fragrance oil also covers many possible formulas. A sandalwood fragrance oil may contain sandalwood material, a synthetic sandalwood molecule, other ingredients used to reconstruct the effect, or some combination of those approaches. The same applies to oud, amber, musk, flowers, fruit, smoke, and nearly every other perfume concept. Modern perfumery is an art of construction. Even a natural extract has been harvested, processed, selected, diluted, blended, and placed into a formula. The constructed nature of perfume does not make it deceitful. The marketing needs to describe the construction accurately. An oud accord can evoke agarwood without pretending that a rare piece of wild resinous wood has been distilled into every inexpensive bottle. A sandalwood-inspired fragrance can create warmth and softness without claiming to be pure Santalum album oil. A Palo Santo accord can reference its aromatic profile without presenting itself as an indigenous ritual object. My incense begins with contemporary charcoal incense blanks and fragrance oils identified by their suppliers as suitable for incense applications. The product belongs to modern craft. It does not recreate the incense of an Egyptian temple, a Japanese fragrance gathering, a South Asian household ritual, or a Catholic mass. It uses a scent vocabulary shaped by those histories, along with modern perfumery and my own artistic interpretation. Translation describes the work better than reenactment. I can research the meanings people have attached to sandalwood, oud, resin, smoke, amber, and heat. I can understand how these materials traveled and why they register as sacred or luxurious to many listeners. Then I can use a modern accord to build an atmosphere around an idea. The result carries historical echoes and remains a contemporary product made here and now. That clarity allows the artistic connection to become stronger. I do not need to pretend my charcoal stick came from an unbroken ancient lineage. The real story is already interesting. We discovered that heat could release fragrance into a room. Cultures developed countless ways of working with that transformation. Trade carried materials and ideas across enormous distances. Modern chemistry expanded the aromatic palette even farther. A small maker now has access to possibilities that once required royal trade networks. The incense on my work table belongs to that history too. Modern fragrance conversations often divide the world into natural and synthetic. Natural sits on one side, surrounded by leaves, sunlight, and moral purity. Synthetic sits on the other side in a suspicious laboratory glowing green. These categories tell us very little about the safety by themselves. Natural substances can cause allergic reactions, irritation, respiratory problems, poisoning, ecological damage, or dangerous interactions. Synthetic materials can also create hazards. Safety depends upon the specific material, dose, route of exposure, product type, and conditions of use. Hemlock is natural. Poison ivy is natural. One could say wildfire smoke is extraordinarily natural and currently doing no favors for anyone's lungs. So as I was preparing this episode in July, our area and many other places were dealing with dangerous air quality connected to smoke from Canadian wildfires. During hazardous air quality events, outdoor smoke may already be raising the level of fine particles inside of our homes. So burning candles, incense, or anything else adds more particles to the air that is already carrying too much of them. The frankincense may be ancient, but smoke still has physical effects. That may be a good day to leave the charcoal unlit and choose another way to shift the atmosphere. Ancient practice can teach us a great deal about culture, symbolism, materials, and history, but it cannot replace current safety knowledge. Earlier makers worked with the information and tools available to them. We now have toxicology, analytical chemistry, product testing, ventilation research, and a much better understanding of respiratory exposure. Responsible modern craft uses that knowledge. I use fragrance oils supplied with documentation for their intended applications, and I formulate within the usage limits provided for those applications. IFRA standards restrict or prohibit certain fragrance materials based on intended use, although they do not make a finished product universally safe for every person. Anything burned indoors adds smoke and fine particles to the air. So people with asthma, migraines, fragrance sensitivity, respiratory illness, or other concerns may need to limit or avoid it. Animals share the air with us, and every home holds smoke differently. Ventilation, room size, how much is burned, how long it burns, and the quality of the air outside all shape what remains in the room after your ritual is over. A thoughtful practice can respond to those conditions. That might mean improving ventilation when the outdoor air is safe, choosing perfume or an unheated resin, setting out a bowl of botanicals, using music or water, or finding another sensory marker that does not add smoke to the space. The form of the ritual can change while its purpose remains. The modern maker has access to an extraordinary library of materials, aromas, and stories. That access creates enormous creative freedom, along with a responsibility to understand what we are bringing into the work. Ethical sourcing usually begins with the physical material. We ask where it was grown, how it was harvested, who performed the labor, and whether the supplier can explain what they are selling. Those questions remain essential. Meaning has a supply chain too. An aromatic material may carry trade history, religious significance, colonial fantasy, or associations created by modern advertising. Sometimes the name on the bottle refers to a plant extract. Sometimes it describes a synthetic reconstruction or an accord designed to suggest a familiar aroma. Sometimes the name is there mainly because customers recognize it. Knowing what the material actually is allows us to be honest about what we're doing with it. We can describe an aroma. We can teach a documented historical use. We can participate in a practice that we understand, or create an artistic interpretation of something that inspires us. Problems begin when vague language borrows the authority of a tradition without naming it, understanding it, or acknowledging the people who gave that practice its meaning. Approaching another culture or tradition with respect does not require treating it as sealed behind glass. Cultures have always learned from one another, and living practitioners are capable of teaching, sharing, adapting, and speaking for themselves. Respectful learning means asking better questions. Who uses this material? How is it used? Why did the practice develop? What knowledge has been shared, and where does my own authority end? Serving a diverse community made those distinctions part of my responsibility. A generic explanation may sound inclusive, but it often leaves every customer with some flattened story, regardless of the tradition that they actually practice. The same material can appear in several religious, magical, domestic, and artistic contexts without those contexts becoming interchangeable. Naming those differences allows more traditions into the conversation. Erasing the differences leaves us with one vague category of mystical authenticity that does not truly represent anyone. For a maker, honor begins with accuracy. Respect includes credit. Ecological care must consider the living material, the environment that supports it, and the people whose livelihoods are tied to its harvest and trade. None of this should make us afraid to create. Greater knowledge gives us more to work with. When I understand where an association comes from, I can engage with it thoughtfully. When a meaning belongs to a particular tradition, I can name that tradition. When the connection is my own artistic invention, I can say so without manufacturing an ancient pedigree to make it sound more important. When the history is already this rich, the truth gives us more to create with. The question is, why does the metaphysical all smell like this? So if you walk into enough metaphysical shops, you begin to recognize the atmosphere before you've looked at a single shelf. Incense smoke, patchouli, sandalwood, resins, oils, perhaps a candle that smells like moonlight, despite none of us actually knowing what the moon smells like. So why does the metaphysical smell like this? By now, part of the answer may already be familiar. Materials such as frankincense and myrrh entered Western consciousness through scripture, church ritual, trade, and perfumery. Sandalwood, resins, spices, and aromatic woods arrived carrying their own regional histories, then gathered new associations as they moved through European markets. Commercial fragrance helped turn those materials into shorthand for luxury, sensuality, mystery, and an imagined exotic elsewhere. Orientalist art and advertising built fantasy versions of temples, bazaars, forests, and spiritual traditions for Western consumers. The people who grew, harvested, traded, and used the materials often disappeared from the picture, while the atmosphere remained. Western occultism added another layer. Ceremonial magic, modern paganism, folk traditions, New Age publishing, correspondence books, and popular witchcraft carried particular scents into ritual practice and eventually onto shop shelves. Then, pop culture taught audiences what mystical space was supposed to look and smell like. A movie needs us to understand immediately that a room is magical, so smoke curls around carved objects while someone chants. A television witch shop contains crystals, dark woods, candles, and an apparently unlimited incense budget. After enough repetition, the expectation begins to sustain itself. Customers expect witch shops to smell like frankincense because witch shops smell like frankincense. Shops stock frankincense because customers expect to find it there. That familiarity does not make the association hollow. A modern practitioner may genuinely experience frankincense as spiritually elevating. Someone may feel grounded by myrrh or use benzoin for blessing and sweetness. Contemporary practice continues to add meaning to the materials it inherits. The difficulty comes when one layer of meaning is allowed to replace the entire history. Frankincense becomes high vibration, while the African and Arabian trees disappear. Sandalwood becomes meditation, while the culture's labor, trade, and ecological pressures vanish from view. A witch shop becomes a living archive of religion, trade, colonial fantasy, occult publishing, pop culture, and contemporary practice, all layered into the same room. Recognizing those layers gives us a richer answer to the question. The metaphysical smells this way because generations of people have taught one another what magic is supposed to smell like. And the witch shop is only one example of the way atmosphere teaches us what to expect. Many modern magical traditions associate incense and smoke with air, connecting them with breath, communication, thought, movement, prayer, imagination, or the transmission of intention. Those elemental systems vary. Some traditions work with 4 elements, others with 5, while many understand the world through entirely different structures. Whatever framework surrounds it, the physical transformation remains compelling. A solid material meets heat and becomes atmosphere. A resin can be held, weighed, traded, and stored inside a container. Once warmed, its fragrance moves beyond the object and enters the surrounding space. The room is changed, and that observable change carries enormous symbolic potential. A prayer may be imagined as traveling with smoke. A ritual may begin when a fragrance reaches the air. Memory may enter through a perfume bottle, while a candle creates the atmosphere of a place that has never physically existed. A person can choose the aura surrounding their body, and a household can shape the world it wants to evoke. Atmosphere changes the way we pay attention. A courtroom asks something different of the body than a kitchen does. Hospitals, nightclubs, churches, funeral homes, classrooms, and childhood bedrooms all possess their own emotional architecture. Long before anyone explains the rules, the environment has begun speaking through light, sound, temperature, furniture, clothing, and scent. Fragrance can mark the moment when one kind of time becomes another. The candle is lit. The incense catches. Perfume touches the skin. Room spray settles into the air. The ordinary day gains a boundary, and within that boundary there may be ceremony, art, remembrance, celebration, or simply dinner prepared with care. The meaning comes from what people do within the atmosphere that they have created. Atmosphere is also shared. The person choosing a fragrance affects every other person and animal in the space. And a scent that brings comfort to one person may cause pain, panic, respiratory symptoms, or an unwanted memory in someone else. Consent and ventilation belong within any thoughtful conversation about fragrance. Sacred meaning does not grant us permission to make everyone nearby inhale the method that we have chosen. A resilient practice can adapt to the bodies, animals, buildings, weather, and people involved. Resin can be carried rather than burned. Oil can be worn. Fragrance can remain unlit. Music, water, botanicals, or a symbolic object can mark the same threshold without adding that smoke to the room. The technique may change while the meaning continues to move through space. Throughout this episode, we have followed fragrance backward. We've traced resin to trees, meanings to tradition, and familiar atmospheres to the people, trade routes, religious practices, books, advertisements, and shops that helped create them. But scent also travels forward. Every time a fragrance is worn at an important moment, burned during a ritual, placed inside a shop, or tied to a particular season, it gathers another association. Repetition becomes recognition. Recognition becomes expectation. Given enough time, expectation begins to look like tradition. One day, someone may wonder why metaphysical shops smelled like patchouli and sandalwood, why a particular perfume came to represent morning, why an entire generation understood apple, cinnamon, and wood smoke are the smell of autumn, even when the actual autumn smells like wet pavement and central heating. The answer will be people like us. The products we make, the languages we place around them, and the moments in which people use them are already becoming part of fragrance history. That is the freedom of working with scent and the responsibility. We do not get to call something sacred while treating the people, places, labor, and living materials behind it as disposable. Reverence should be visible in the choices we make before the incense is lit, before the perfume is bottled, and before the story reaches the label. We inherit materials and meanings shaped by countless lives before ours. Then we add something of our own and send them onward. Right now, whether we realize it or not, we are helping decide what magic will smell like to someone who has not been born yet. Thank you so much for listening to this month's episode of The Inner Circle. This episode is the companion to Blackwater Apothecary's July Just Add Magic subscription box, Temple of the Sun, created to transport us into a world of sacred scent, sun-warmed stone, incense smoke, ritual beauty, and the long human history of turning fragrance into meaning. The box includes incense, perfume, tea, and aromatic resins inspired by the ideas explored in this episode. You can find out how to subscribe to the box along with our current Blackwater Apothecary offerings at blackwaterapothecary.com. Thank you to everyone who subscribes, listens, and shares these episodes. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and be thoughtful about the stories you carry into the world. Are you still there? Since you stayed all the way to the end, I have a little secret for you. This month's secret code word is potato salad. Just send us a private message containing the words potato salad by July 30th, and you will receive 20 bonus entries into this month's perfume giveaway. Please do not leave the code word in a public comment. Let the secret remain with the people who found it here. One secret code redemption per person. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. You're the bestest. Love you. Bye.